Hi, this is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and we have with us Andrew Fulginiti and Ryan Brady. Hey, Andrew, how are you today?
Good. Doing great.
And Ryan, what's going on?
Enjoying the holiday season.
So today we're going to talk about the French riots over the gas tax. Is this really about climate change, or is it about France's need to pay for their unsustainable social welfare state? We're also going to talk about millennials and safe spaces, particularly at American University. And also we're going to talk about the dumbest bill in the United States. So first, this is Mark and the Millennials. And I want to talk about the French riots and what's happening in France with the, the Yellow Jackets? Is that what we're talking about, Andrew?
Yellow vests.
The Yellow Vests,
Yeah.
okay. The yellow, and tell us about that.
Yes, I was actually unfamiliar about this until just recently, but it looks like in France there's riots going on. They've been going on for the last couple of weeks over President Macron's decision to put what he's calling a carbon tax, which is mainly going to affect the middle class, the working class there in France. And he's proposing it as a bill that would help the environment.
So would that increase the gas tax?
Correct.
And so the current gas tax, it looks here from this article, it looks like the current gas tax is about Investors Business Daily says it's about $5.50, and they're going to increase it to about $7.50. And so go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like obviously the middle class is revolting against this, and the question is whether or not is this actually a move that's, the president's goal is to, help climate change, and or is it actually something to pay for his socialist reforms and his all the benefits that he wants to provide to the people?
Exactly. And Ryan, what can you add to this debate about the French basically burning their cities and knocking in windows of stores and the anger of the middle class? But it's not just the middle class. Apparently, it's folks in the country, some folks that are middle class in the city, some folks that are in the suburbs. It's really a kind of a mixture of folks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from my understanding about this whole issue is that primarily it's a lack of listening to your constituents, especially those in the rural areas of France, because their main mode of transportation is using petrol, aka diesel, or just your normal car gasoline to get to and from their places of work and their places of residencies. With that, they are living on very meager incomes, and they're also being taxed with their incomes. And then if there's a gas tax that gets increased, they also have staggering incomes that affect their ability to actually have a livable wage and actually live comfortably. I see a lot of issues with that.
Okay, so, and it says here in the article, of course, Investors Business Daily and The Federalist, two great sources of information, it says that the French motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, which is liberty, equality, brotherhood, of course, the idea is they want the French people and socialism to be equal. But the problem is that the French people are now saying, well, wait a minute, if equality is going to cost us our ability to have a better life, then because we're going to be taxed so much, then maybe we don't want socialism. What is it? What about this populist movement?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. And in the article, it says that a lot of the reporters talked to the Yellow Vest protesters, and one of their biggest issues is that there's a lack of equality and brotherhood in France, which is kind of hilarious. I mean, they've been instituting these socialist policies, which are supposed to unite everyone and be, for all. And yet their inequality is running rampant, at least according to this middle class group in France. And you can kind of see some parallels here in the United States with that because, people will say that, President Obama wanted to institute socialist policies. And people also argue, especially on the right, argue that since President Obama was in office, that tensions, race relations, whatever, inequality has been at its all-time high, and tensions in the country have been at its all-time high. So is there a correlation between the socialist policies and things like that? I don't know, but it's interesting to see that correlation with what's going on in France.
And I wanted to read this, Andrew. It says from the Federalist, it says some protesters took control of a toll booth and allowed cars to travel free of charge. Jacques, a teacher and Yellow Vest protester, said the road was once used by everyday French people to go on vacation and was known as the Holiday Road. But due to increasing costs, average citizens could no longer afford to take such vacations. Another protester said that many people feel they can't afford Christmas presents for their children. I mean, Brian, this sounds like the classic socialist experiment where there's never enough revenue to pay for it.
Exactly. And then my question is, if they do go through the gas tax, which right now it's off the table or in discussions with the protesters and with the government of France, where are we saying where are we saying, where is this gas tax revenue coming from? Where will it go? Is it actually going to curb gas tax, green carbon emissions, or will it be going towards paying off the socialist programs that the French president approves of?
No, that's a great point. I mean, that's what everybody thinks. Everybody thinks that the purpose of the so-called climate change accords and so forth is to impose more taxes on the people to pay for more social welfare programs. In other words, to give more money to the elites and the bureaucrats so they can make the decision as to how the money is spent and control more of your life. And so with that said, I mean, we see this happening across Europe. I mean, are there other countries, Andrew, that are looking at this?
Yeah, I mean, the article talks about that in Belgium and the Netherlands, there's also riots going on. I think Romania was included in that list. But I find it interesting that a lot of these taxes that countries that are moving in the socialist direction, when they try to put these taxes in, they're taxes that affect everyday goods and items that directly correlate with the middle class, the working class, the people that are trying to help. So, for example, gas tax, or people add taxes onto like water bottles, things like that. It's items that may not necessarily affect the elites and the one percenters that, you know, that socialism is supposed to, like, you know, counter. It's hurting the people that it's supposed to be helping.
Yeah, and the Federalist says, another paragraph says, people may believe in climate change and want to protect the environment, but not at the expense of their families and their lives. Eventually, a line will be crossed where services and resources will be unavailable to most people, similar to what happened in Venezuela. With immigration issues, high unemployment, and a stagnating economy, and a national debt of more than $2.5 trillion in France, along with other economic and social issues, how much longer can socialism in France or other similarly situated European countries survive? Ryan.
To be honest, I'm not too familiar as an expert on this, but it's going to be interesting how the taxes.
That's because you're a millennial, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've been reading on geopolitics of Russia and China, so apologies. But yes,
I have to say too, Ryan is a cybersecurity expert, so you know he's actually really a bright guy. So
too kind, but yeah.
But a millennial nonetheless.
Yes, dirty millennials. But yes, so socialism, it's a good idea until you run out of people's money. I think Margaret Thatcher said that not too long ago.
Absolutely.
So that's my stance on it.
Andrew, what do you think about this this quote in the Federalist about Venezuela and making that comparison?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was super interesting. I actually noted that out of those four things, you got the immigration issues, high unemployment, stagnating economy, and national debt. If you think about those four things as you know, a recipe for disaster, and then you look at the United States, we probably, you could say easily, you know, you could argue for some, but I say we'd have two of those.
Or look at Venezuela's inflation rate.
Right.
Their currency's nothing.
I mean, we definitely have immigration issues. Immigration is a huge issue, and then the national debt is, you know, of serious concern. I would say that our economy is growing, so we don't have the stagnant economy, and we don't have the high unemployment, but those are due to President Trump's policies. So if we were to go towards what the far left is pushing in these socialist policies, would those two become a problem, and then we would be in the same situation that France is now?
So how about this? How about you guys are millennials, right? So tell us what like your friends who are millennials think about this issue. I mean, do they even care about communism and socialism? Do they care about what's happening in Europe? Do they see any parallels about the fact that could happen here or is happening here in certain states?
I honestly don't think they even know about what's happening with the yellow vests in France right now.
But I guess they would if they had to pay $7.50 for a gallon of gas.
Yeah, if they're directly affected, they sure would.
I mean, do you think, Ryan, that they would be willing to pay $7.50 to curb climate change?
I wouldn't, because that would hurt my paycheck and my checking account.
But how about your friends?
My friends, they would probably get angry about that as well.
How about you, Andrew? Your friends, tell us what they think about this.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I've never heard one of my friends talk about this. I mean, I wasn't, privy to a lot of this information, but I think that I do definitely have friends that think socialism is a good thing, huge Bernie Sanders supporters, but I think that they like the policies, but don't necessarily understand the minutia as far as like how it's actually going to like affect them personally. I think the pie in the sky idea sounds so good, but there's no like actual debate anymore, so they don't hear the other side, so they don't know like what's bad about those policies and how it would be could negatively affect them.
Because look, I mean, obviously I'm not a millennial. I'm in the Maryland House of Delegates, proud to be there. Oh, by the way, name dropping. But here's the thing with you guys, with the millennials, I mean, you talk to your friends and they talk about climate change. I hear this all the time from millennials. I'm really concerned about the climate. I'm really concerned about how it's changing. I see global warming. I see seas rising. And but then when you talk about the solutions and you see what's happening in France, I mean, I see this more as a power grab by government and by bureaucrats to, without any real science to tell us, is there going to be a reduction in any of these bad things that are happening if we increase gas to $7.50? What do you guys? I mean,
Yeah.
talk to me.
So I have one good example that came to my mind when you just brought that up. Not too long ago, I remember there was a partnership with the state of Maryland and with Google, and they were going to propose creating offshore wind farms off of Ocean City, far enough out where there's only going to be like you couldn't see them.
This is
in the
Ocean
horizon.
City, Maryland. You're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Not Ocean City, New Jersey, or anywhere else. But where people were concerned that it would affect their view or affect their income property, but it was going to be offset in a partnership with Google and the state of Maryland a couple of years back, and it would create. It wouldn't really create a dual. There's no increase in taxes of the state of Marylanders or anything like that. It would create renewable energy without actually impacting people's lives. So would the advancement of technology to make renewable resources be better, or instead of actually hurting people on their everyday commute when it hits directly to their wallet, when they need to get to point A to point B, provide their family, take their kids to practice of soccer or any other athletics, school functions, going to the grocery store, because they don't have mass transit.
Well, of course, and one of the most fundamental parts of human freedom is the freedom and the right to move about in your country
Yes.
and throughout the world freely. And if you're going to take away that right because you're going to say only the rich people and upper middle class people can afford to move around and own a car and even put gas in the car, then essentially what you're saying is that there are two kinds of society. There's the flyover society, where the rich get to fly over them, and then there's everybody else that have to.
The coast-to-coast elites.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like the Hunger Games, right? You have the capital city, and then everybody else on the outside, they have to basically,
It's starting to feel that way for sure.
yeah, with France. How about you?
I think a lot of millennials that are pro-socialist policies see only the good intention benefits of what we provide, helping the poor and things like that, and healthcare for all and all those things. But I don't think they realize or take too much into account what they're giving up by giving the government all these extra powers and what they would lose by giving that. Because I mean, it sounds like a great thing. Like, who doesn't want to help sick and poor people that can't help themselves? But I don't think they realize exactly how much they're losing by giving the government all that control and basically creating
a great point.
a monopoly in so many different industries.
And could it be managed properly as another bureaucracy that gets overbearing and over convoluted?
Right, and that's the problem in a lot of these socialist countries is not only were the policies likely going to fail, but the people that ran the policies, weren't effective.
So our second subject, great discussion on that. Do you guys? Well, before we do, is Macron going to survive? I mean, is he going to survive this?
There are calls for House and National Assembly, so we'll see what happens. I think it's too early to tell.
I thought it was super interesting that it said in he made a speech recently early in December. They call it like his Christmas speech, that he was going to give the people of France Christmas gifts, and his gifts to try and save his political career were all socialist policies. He said he promised to increase the minimum wage. Policies to help all graduates find a job, tax-free overtime pay.
Well, if you're competent to get a job.
Yeah, end-of-the-year tax bonuses for every worker, but he didn't list how any of these are going to be paid for.
Well, with the gas tax, of course.
Right, yeah.
And he capitulated too. A lot of people are saying he lost his strength because he capitulated when people started getting violent. He said the protests weren't because of the violence, but we'll see what happens.
That's great discussion. Look, next subject, millennials and safe spaces. Are we bringing back Jim Crow on college campuses? Now, I have to set this up because this is almost too hard to believe, but it's true. Apparently, American University has a bunch of students, I'm not sure how many, but it's enough, that have decided that they want to have a safe space on campus. Now, this isn't new, I know. We've heard this about other universities, but this is the latest, and there's an article in Breitbart. American University students and administrators are pushing for spaces on campus designated for students of color, claiming that it will promote diversity and inclusion at the university. And students and staff at the American University, again, I'm reading from Breitbart, are calling for the creation of more spaces for students of color so that minority students can have an area on campus where they can go to be separated from the rest of the campus body in the name of diversity and inclusion, according to the university student newspaper. So, we have a situation where folks of color at American University have decided that Jim Crow is a good thing. White people can't come, so they're creating a new Jim Crow, but it's Jim Crow in reverse. Let's talk about this, because this is a uniquely millennial problem, and it's happening right in the nation's capital at American University.
This almost sounds really reminiscent to what happened at Evergreen State College with that one professor when there was that big day of absence, and I guess white students weren't allowed to participate, as in like solidarity. And then there's the one professor that got totally ridiculed and harassed for taking a stand against it, and he supports most liberal policies, but he started getting, the whole crowd turned on him for saying, I'm just going to hold class, I'm still going to hold my exam, it's your volunteering to skip the class, not my fault.
Andrew.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those things where you're like not proud to be a millennial. Like I read this and I'm like cringing. But I found it interesting that this organization that they want to form, or they have formed, is called HOME. That's the acronym for it. Hub for Organizing Multiculturalism and Equity. HOME. And when I think of a hub for organizing multiculturalism and equity, isn't that what a classroom is? Like, isn't that exactly what you're doing when you go to college? Is you're with students from different backgrounds, different locations and everything? Like, we already have that. That's what college is.
And what happens when they go into the workforce? I mean, they're going to go apply at, let's say, a large corporation in Washington area, maybe Deloitte, for example. And they say, I'm sorry, I need to be in a safe space with only the people that look like me, or perhaps are my same religion, or, perhaps are Democrats or Republicans or unaffiliated. I mean, this is crazy. Yeah. This is crazy.
Yeah, I think this is all a result. I mean, there's so many things, so much division in the country. I think it's all from a lack of debate in educational institutions, but just even among common citizens, like the lack to want to debate, have a debate, engage in a political debate or a social debate about anything now, is that everyone's separating into groups, and there's no you're not experiencing different cultures, and that we have to have separate rooms to do that now. You can't actually just engage with someone in a classroom because you feel intimidated by them. It's crazy.
And a campus is a very open and diverse and liberal place to begin with across the country anyway. So how farther are we? Did we already achieve the finish line, or are we pushing it back more and more to go farther and farther until you just basically eat your own tail as the snake?
I tell you, I would love to interview at some point, kind of insert it in one of our podcasts, these folks who think this is a great idea at American University. That would be really fun, because I'm sure it would be frightening to hear this millennial perspective of why it's necessary to separate people. But what's interesting is my generation, the baby boom generation, we worked very hard to try to create a society where people were integrated. And it blows me away that there is, obviously not all millennials, but there are a lot of millennials who think this is a good idea. It just blows me away that they think that Jim Crow for the more than first half of the 20th century, was something that our country is very embarrassed about, separate but equal. And now we have a situation where folks are on campus saying, oh yeah, we want to go back to that day with Jim Crow, because separate but equal is a good thing, even though we're supposed to create critical thinkers on college campuses. But instead we're creating drones who are graduating, and they're not even able to think critically about anything.
And I have a point to that. It seems, and I can understand why some students want this to happen, only because they want to share their experiences with people that are like themselves. But the problem that I see with that is, why don't you invite people that are different from yourself to create a diverse learning environment where you can educate people saying, why I feel something is wrong, let me tell you why, my experience. And then you can actually have an open dialogue where it can be back and forth, where everyone says, this is where I'm coming from, this is where I'm coming from. Eventually you have a collaborative environment where everyone gets a sense of equality and learns from each other. I don't think you need to necessarily separate to have your own group.
Well, get this. AU student newspaper goes on to say, according to Breitbart, that many students also called for the university to create a black house in response to racist incidents on campus. The idea behind a quote-unquote black house is to provide a living, learning community for black students, which would be followed up with a survey gauging students' interests in potentially implementing a similar layout with AU's inventory of housing. So what we're talking about is a situation where there would be houses not just safe spaces, because to me, I thought a safe space initially was a space on the outside of campus, like on the quad, where this is where one group would meet and this is where another group would meet. But instead, what we're talking about is actually having dorm rooms where, Black students need not apply, Hispanic students need not apply, white students need not apply, because only students of a certain race can live in those dorm rooms. This is just unthinkable. This is crazy. Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get, if someone doesn't feel comfortable, if in certain scenarios, but if you want to, and your family wants you to go to an institution or something that caters more towards African Americans or whatever it is, they have historically Black colleges, they have all these universities, all these things exist already. But kind of going back to your point is that the whole civil rights movement was fought to prevent something like this from happening. So I feel like this is kind of like going hand in hand with how
people should be judged by the content of the character, not the color of their skin.
This is one of the scary side effects of erasing history and not properly teaching history and not relearning history. And so, our generation doesn't realize, what was the civil rights movement for? They're all just, snowflakes.
But isn't it interesting that the snowflakes think that their proposal to separate people, to segregate people, is a really great liberal idea? And then their parents and grandparents, the liberal idea at the time, but also a lot of Republicans obviously agreed as well, was that we shouldn't have segregation. We shouldn't have Jim Crow. And now the people that are speaking up are the conservatives and saying this is wrong. And we're being told as conservatives that this is a terrible idea. We shouldn't interject ourselves in college life, because college life should be, about giving people safe spaces, and the snowflakes should never be called out because we might hurt their feelings.
And to that point, I remember not too long ago there was a lot of hype on the theoretical idea of we're not more of a melting pot, we're more of a patchwork of a quilt. So everyone has their own stitched corner that's a part of the American fabric, rather than everyone bringing all their diverse culture and putting it together in a melting pot and making a really rich and diverse culture that everyone's pulling from. But now we're seeing everyone segregating each other, saying cultural appropriation, and then it's like, well...
Have you experienced anything this, Ryan, like in college or since, where people say, you're in a bar or wherever, people say, I want you to go over there?
No, not necessarily, but I've seen a lot of stories about bad parties, themes, and also from Towson, my experience at Towson University in Maryland, you started seeing it as I was getting out of college, out of Towson, but it was getting interesting. It was getting very, very liberal and progressive over there. I was like, I thought this was a pretty diverse campus. What needs to change?
But liberal and progressive from the standpoint of separating people by race and gender, and probably sexual orientation as well, rather than having everybody mix it up in the college and get to know everybody and not judge people based on those things.
Yeah, I don't think it got there yet, but it was probably leading that way. Yeah, I couldn't speak that much to it.
Yeah, the same kind of experience in college is that, definitely a more liberal institution, but in the classrooms and even the teachers that were clearly more liberal leaning, there was still debate, there was still discussion. There was no separating, based on your opinion or political beliefs. But you see that my personal experience is I see that more in just regular day-to-day activities now, neighborhood gatherings, things like that, when there's that group think. If you're part of this bubble, you only talk about certain issues with your group. Not to bring up politics with an opposing, somebody who opposes your viewpoint and stuff like that. And I feel like that's happening more and more. And I don't know if I necessarily saw that years ago, and it seems like it's being more and more divisive.
That's great. So go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah,
finish that up.
To that end, back at Towson, I was in a traditional social fraternity, and usually all those stereotypes get applied to a traditional social fraternity, where it's just all bunch of white, upper class kids that are not going to be integrating with other people of other skins, cultures, backgrounds, religions, etc. But my fraternity, my chapter at Towson, was actually very diverse, very accepting. We had the whole spectrum of political ideas, religions, different study habits, but we had a pretty solid GPA.
But when you met people, did you ask them, hey, what's your religion?
No.
Of course not. Of course you don't do that in college. Of course you don't do that in the workplace either. In fact, if you do it in the workplace, you're probably going to get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So, at what point, I feel like as a non-millennial, right, that what we have now are folks going to college, and the first thing they do is they try to find their affinity group, and they say, hey, who's a Catholic? Hey, who's a Jew? Hey, who's a Protestant? And you want to hang out with those people. Who's black? Who's white? Who's Asian? Who's Hispanic? And you must go to those affinity groups And in the past, that's not the way it was supposed to be. That was the one place you're supposed to mix it up and meet people and
And
make
I don't
lifelong
think that
friends.
way at all. If someone thinks that way, I think they're looking at life the wrong way. You should be embracing everybody and hanging out with people that you like that have the same common interests, not based on what social groups you're applying to.
Absolutely. Andrew, final thoughts on this particular subject?
Yeah, man, I think it's a shame that there's students out there that think this is a great idea, reversing history and things that their ancestors may have fought for, at least
Reversing
lived through.
progress.
Right, exactly, and it's funny. It's contradictory because a lot of like the millennials in our generation believe in equality for all to the point that they want socialism and support socialism, but some of these policies are very exclusive. So yeah, it's a shame that this is something that millennials are going to be associated with, and so I don't feel great being a part of the millennial group when this is something that's
Guys, that was a great conversation about millennials and safe spaces. Look, each podcast we're going to talk about the dumbest bill, right? The dumbest bill in America. So it could be a state legislature, it could be a county, a city, it could be the federal government. And so this week, and of course we could have a drum roll, but we're not going to do that. We could do that perhaps a later podcast, but or some lead in. This week, the dumbest bill in the United States. California cemeteries, so it's obviously the state of California. California cemeteries can apply for a liquor license if the cemetery is 100 years old and the cemetery has designated monuments or kind of like a designated historical cemetery by the city of Los Angeles. So I think it's a state bill that applies to the city of Los Angeles. It's Assembly Bill 1217, and it was passed this year in 2018. And kind of thoughts about legislation that is along this line. Ryan.
And I thought you were going to say California state cemeteries cause cancer and birth defects.
Well, let me ask you, are there safe spaces in the cemetery? I mean, that's what I want to know.
I don't know, the ghost may not like you. I think you got to be 6 feet under to join that club.
Andrew, tell us.
This is so bizarre to me. I'm not even sure I completely understand it. I was trying to like read through this to figure out like what exactly was going on, and like I'm trying to figure out who benefits from this. So this bill, like you said, says it gives cemeteries the ability to get a liquor license, but you
That's
have to
right.
be a for-profit cemetery.
That's right.
You have to be more than 100 years old. You have to be designated as a historic cultural monument and have an endowment that is exempt from payment of income taxes.
So Beverly Hills Cemetery, if that one exists.
Yeah.
All the celebrities pour one out for the homies.
And so what if you go up to someone's gravesite and that person never drank in their lives, and they're now dead, and the guy who owns the cemetery says, "Okay, who wants a glass of wine?"
Yeah, they're wheeling around like a cart. It's like a beer cart going around.
Right.
And it's
You're going to kill a lot of grass that way.
Yeah, you got a beer cart, a wine cart. Apparently, it's distillery. I mean, it's everything.
Yeah.
It's a liquor license for anything, whiskey and beer and wine. I mean, the whole 9 yards. I mean, pretty soon, I think California should actually allow microbreweries on cemeteries. I mean, I think that would be great. You can actually make beer on the cemetery.
Nutrient-rich soil.
It's so gross.
Well, San Francisco, I think it was San Francisco just recently was one of the cities that created the safe spaces for drug use and heroin injection. Is this going to be one of those where it's if you're an alcoholic, you can use this? We have safe spaces in cemeteries now. You can go to get wasted in cemeteries.
Beer Olympics in the cemeteries, grave hopping.
That's right. It's Assembly Bill 1217, Chapter 474. I mean, you have to look this up in the California General Assembly. It looks like it applies to the city of Los Angeles, but it could be statewide. It's kind of hard to read this.
Did Kevin
read a lot of
Malone
these.
sponsor this one?
Is this just LA?
It looks like it's a state mandate on a local program.
On
So
a
it
local
looks like-
program.
yeah, just
okay.
LA.
So it's just LA. So they needed state legislation, kind of like our state, Maryland, where in order to be able to change legislation for alcohol, of course, back to the Prohibition days, you have to pass state legislation to apply to the local government, which is what they must have to do there as well. Very confusing. I just want I just want to hear from you guys, like, who thinks of these things? I have this story in the Maryland legislature where apparently, like, delegates, members of the House of Delegates, folks in the General Assembly, Maryland state senators, they want to basically pass legislation because they want to go home and tell their constituents, hey, look, I passed X amount of bills. In fact, a very good friend of mine in the legislature said he passes bills that have sunsets so that way the next year when the sunset is up, he can actually extend the sunset with legislation to demonstrate that he's passed a bill. And I think that sometimes that's what we do here with these things. I mean, do you guys do you not think that there's maybe too many bills? Because that's why we're doing these segments on the podcast with respect to the dumbest bill, because I think legislators run out of things to do. And so they kind of think of these stupid ideas to try to show, so they can go home. I mean, can you imagine being the legislator? You go home and say, guess what I did? I'm going to allow you to drink at the cemetery.
Yeah, when I look at bills like this, I almost want to think, look at the person's friends, whoever passed the bill. What is their friend, what business are they into? It's like, are you passing this bill for someone who owns a cemetery and decides they're a for-profit cemetery, they already got tax exemption, and now they want to sell booze? So it's like, sometimes it's a lot of those things with cronies where you're helping out a buddy or something like that. Because I can't imagine if you just want to pass a bill, this is something you came up with.
Oh, feather your cap.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, straight up feather your cap, to be honest. Because sometimes these bills, like, okay, if it's a sunset bill, how much is it actually costing the state taxpayers of Maryland? You're like, for 1 year, it's going to cost X amount of money to commission a study, or there's a bill to start a program that's going to end in a year. Then you're going to re-up it just to get more bills passed. I get it. I've seen it a lot when I worked at the General Assembly in the House of Delegates. And then we also had this experience locally in Annapolis with Mayor Buckley in the bike lane.
Yeah, talk about that.
So I guess it was legal in a sense.
Was that to allow beer and wine and liquor in the bike lane? Is that what that was?
No, I don't think so. I think you can still get DUI with that. I think Annapolis PD would like that to issue those tickets. Just basically a bike lane appeared one day, and all of a sudden all the store owners were like, we lost parking spaces, we potentially lost business and street view for our stores, and it was not well received. And then you had a big campaign from the people that were for it, a minority group from my understanding, and it disappeared within a month?
Oh, absolutely. And so look, I just want to say this for all those who are listening, if you have a great discovery of a really dumb bill that you want us to talk about, like the dumbest bill in America, I mean, please go to our Facebook page and post it on there, and we'll talk about it, I promise you. There are so many of them. We're only going to talk about one, perhaps maybe two at the most per podcast. But that really covers this podcast. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank Ryan Brady. I want to thank Andrew Fulginiti and Adam Couture, who's the technical person over there sitting down. Obviously, you can't see him, but he's fantastic. And Olivia Fisher, who has done a lot of the research. Again, stay tuned. Please come back. Listen to Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark and the Millennials out. Thank you.